We are live.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Exam School Admissions Task Force. Because this is a remote session, I will ask Ms. Harvex to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Contempasis. Mr. Acevedo, Ms. Aguirre,
Present.
Mr. Chernow, Mr. Kreger,
Present.
Dr. Freeman Wisdom, Ms. Grassa,
Present.
Ms. Lam,
Present.
Ms. Nagasawa,
Present.
Ms. Garrett, Dr. Kang,
Present.
Ms. Wade,
Present.
Ms. Sullivan,
Present.
Mr. Contempasis,
Present.
and I see Mr. Acevedo.
I'm present. Good evening.
Thank you very much.
We are pleased to be offering live simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cape Verdean, Portuguese, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Somali, Arabic, and American Sign Language. After I finish introducing the interpreters, we will activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. Click the icon to select your language preference. Our Spanish interpreter this evening is Randolph Dominguez. Will you please invite our Spanish-speaking audience to switch their Zoom channel in Spanish?
Hello, Mr. Contempasis. Hello, rest of members of the board. Muy buenas noches, damas y caballeros. Mi nombre es Randolph Domínguez. Yo voy a ser su intérprete simultáneo del idioma español el día de hoy. Para poder acceder al idioma español y poder escuchar esta reunión en español, una vez haya sido activado, ustedes van a ver un icono en la parte inferior de su pantalla que parece un globo terráqueo. Van a pulsar allí, van a seleccionar el idioma español para poder escuchar esta reunión en español. Si por el contrario están utilizando un celular, en la parte superior derecha de su pantalla hay 3 puntos. Pulsen allí y seleccionen el idioma español para poder escuchar la reunión en español. Muchas gracias. Buenas noches. You can
Thank
go,
you.
Mr. Contempasis.
Our Cape Verdean interpreter is Josanne Lopes. Will you please give the Zoom instructions in Cape Verdean?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Contempasis. Alô, boa tarde. Meu nome é Josiane, sou da meus intérprete de crioulo para que a reunião ali. Para ter acesso à interpretação simultânea, clica no ícone de globo na parte inferior do ecrã e seleciona Cabo Verdeano. Se você tem alguma dúvida, coloca no chat. Se você usa o telemóvel, clica na 3 pontinhos. Obrigada. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Portuguese interpreter is Christian Leitner. Will you please give Zoom instructions in Portuguese?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good night. Good evening. Olá, meu nome é Cristiane. Eu sou intérprete de português brasileiro. Se você precisa de interpretação para essa reunião, uma vez que eles abrirem os canais, você vai ver um globo na parte inferior da tela. Ali você clica e escolhe o canal português. Se você estiver utilizando um celular, você vai ver na parte superior direita 3 pontinhos. Você clica ali e escolhe o canal português. Obrigada. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Vietnamese interpreter is Duyen Tru. Will you please give the Zoom instructions in Vietnamese?
Xin chào quý vị, tôi tên là Duyên Triệu, là thông dịch viên hôm nay. Anh chị có cần tiếng Việt xin chọn quả cầu và chọn ngôn ngữ tiếng Việt thì tôi sẽ cung cấp thông dịch liên tục cho anh chị. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Cantonese interpreter is Terry Yin. Please give the Zoom instructions in Cantonese.
Thank you. 大家好，我名叫 Terry， 我係你哋嘅廣東話翻譯。一陣咧，你喺屏幕下邊見到個地球儀嘅圖標，你點下地球儀嘅圖標，之後揀 Cantonese 就可以入到廣東話翻譯啦。如果你係用手機或者係 iPad 上嘅話咧，你喺手機下邊點3個點，咁之後咧再點下呢個翻譯，再揀 Cantonese 就可以揾到呢個廣東話翻譯啦。唔該晒，一陣見。Thank you.
Thank you. Our Mandarin interpreter is Wei Li. Please give the Zoom instructions in Mandarin.
Thank you. 大家下午好啊，我是你的普通话翻译李伟。如果你需要普通话翻译呢，请你点击屏幕下方的地球仪，然后选中中文啊，你到时候选的时候选择 Chinese 中文这个频道，而不是 不是广东话啊，不是广东话频道。然后你就可以进入到这个频道听翻译。如果你是用这个手机或者是平板电脑的话呢，你可以点上面的3个点，点了之后呢，也是进入中文中文频道，然后就可以听我的翻译。好，祝大家都好运。OK, back to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Our Haitian Creole interpreter is Sergio Saint-Hilaire. Please give the Zoom instructions in Haitian Creole.
Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Sergio Saint-Hilaire, Haitian Creole interpreter. C'est un plaisir pour nous encore, pour nous avoir après-midi, pour nous présenter dans le programme ça, pour nous traduire pour tout ça veut dire dans la langue préférée là. Et que si vous avez besoin d'entrer dans le système là, ou cliquer dans le bas écran là, ou après globe blanc, et puis vous rentrer là-dedans, ou dire tout ça besoin de traduire pour. Et nous souhaitons bonne écoute, bonne participation. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Our Arabic interpreter is Ahmed Al-Rubaye. Please give the Zoom instructions in Arabic.
Thank you. مرحبا، أنا اسمي أحمد الربائي، أنا مترجم اللغة العربية لهذا اليوم. بإمكانكم الاستماع إلى الترجمة باللغة العربية من خلال الذهاب إلى أسفل الشاشة. ستشاهدون علامة الكرة الأرضية، اضغط على هذه العلامة وستتمكن من رؤية الاختيارات بالنسبة للغات. قم باختيار اللغة العربية وعندها ستتمكن من استماع إلى الترجمة باللغة العربية فوريا. شكرا جزيلا. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Our Somali interpreter is Camilla Fatoon Jamal. Please give the Zoom instructions in Somali.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Camilla. Kusoo dhawaada galabta, magacaygu waa Fortune Camilla. Caawa meeshan ku sheeg uga hadlayna imtixaanka iyo shirkii hore noo sii socday kasii socon halkeena. Marka waxaad iga heli kartiin globalka Soomaaliga haddaad rabtiin inaad dhegeystiin qaybta Soomaaliga. Marka kusoo dhawaada. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have American Sign Language interpreters, Crystal Chung and Katie McFarland. Thank you all for assisting us this evening. We will now activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of the screen. And I'd like to remind everyone to speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. There are no minutes to approve this evening. They will be at the next meeting. So we'll move on to a review of the data requested. Is Ms. Hogan on the line? Ms. Roberts? Well,
hi.
Hi.
I don't believe that we have additional data for this evening.
Okay. It is imperative that the task force no later than as soon as possible gets that data so that we can bring some level of closure to the items that we're now discussing. And before I turn it over to Ms. Sullivan, I do want to thank everyone on the task force for reaching consensus on the determination of the GPA, both in during phase 1 as well as in phase 2. Ms. Sullivan, anything to add?
No, I concur. And we'll continue to just drive toward some consensus here over the next few meetings. I remain very optimistic that that we're going to get this done, and we're going to get it done well. So appreciate certainly the robust dialogue and debate, and I hope in the rigor of it, and hope that it continues, because that's where I believe some of the best solutions reside. So I know that we have, obviously we've got, kind of trying to bring some resolution to the creation of the pool, so the eligibility piece. And we also need to resolve the mechanism piece. I actually might suggest that we start with the mechanism tonight. What we have on the table, and correct me if I miss anything, folks. What we currently have on the table are looking at the mechanism. We've got the 20/80, right? And so that would be the 20% seat allocation citywide based on a straight ranking, which is which is what we did. Our recommendation was for the interim policy, and then 80% seat allocation based on, and what we have on the table is the use of tiers. I think where we last left off, we were looking at 8 tiers in particular as an option for allocation of seats, the mechanism for seat allocation. We also have on the table mechanism for seat allocation, again, 20/80, but with the 80% being allocated based on census tracts. And we still have on the table the utilization of a lottery process based on a pool of applicants that is qualified as we may determine on a set of criteria. I think those are the 3 that are in play currently. Am I missing anything? Or have I not captured where folks believe we are? This is on the mechanism for invitations.
Ms. Sullivan, you know, I would like to offer a suggestion. I've listened over and thought about this over the weekend. And if you remember, we did not come to closure on whether indeed any of these areas are segmenting the mechanics, the use or not of an assessment and what have you. I thought that when we had the discussion around the GPA, that it helped us to consider this in 2 phases. And it made it, I think, easier in the long run to reach consensus, recognizing, I think, as we all did, that regardless of what we do, this has been a very difficult year for students wherever they may happen to be, but particularly for students in BPS. And so perhaps it would be worthwhile, and I'd ask for others who have talked about this to weigh in here, to think about this in some sort of phase 1, phase 2, much as we did with the GPA determination. We came to consensus, as you well know, around utilizing only the 6 grades, either by the 2 quarters of the trimester system. We agreed to add 2 additional subjects to the GPA. And we also looked at what we would be doing in phase 2, where we've reintroduced the 5th grade as well. And I believe in English language arts and math. It may be helpful to really determine whether there's any interest in looking at the components, and we can start with whatever one we'd like, in a phase 1, phase 2 possibility. And I offer that as a suggestion. And I believe I saw a couple of hands up, unless Dr. Tung, did you take your hand down?
Yep, so I just want to clarify which section where are you suggesting that we look at the mechanism for seat allocation in phases? Is that your suggestion?
I was, yes, initially,
Okay.
but I would like to look at all of the pieces that hopefully we can hone in on this evening the same way.
Okay, yep, so point taken, I agree. But I just want to do a gut check because I might not have captured on the mechanism side. So starting at the back end of this mechanism for seat allocation, did I capture where we are in terms of, yes, Dr. Tung, what am I missing?
Well, I would like to keep on the table the top X percent. However, instead of by sending school, which was my original suggestion weeks ago, by sending school opportunity index grouping, because I want to be sensitive to the concern that Ms. Garrett raised about 97 sending schools, all of different sizes, putting undue pressure on particularly the schools with small numbers of sixth graders. So I believe that sending schools grouped by OI, by like OI, touches both our desire for socioeconomic diversity and neighborhood diversity. So it touches both of our requirements for geography and for SES.
So can you, I'm sorry.
Well, because you, at the beginning of this meeting, you said that seat allocation, we've been talking about 8 tiers and we've been talking about census tracts. Tiers are SES. They won't guarantee neighborhood diversity.
Right.
And census tracts don't take into account the SES. So there's a way, I have an idea for how to get around that too, by combining tiers and census tracts. But I would also like to keep on the table sending school groups by OI.
So Dr. Tung, I appreciate that. I'm not sure that I follow how you would use the sending schools. Where are you, how would, because you mentioned the 20% and then you mentioned sending school. Could you explain how you would use sending schools group by OI? Where would that fall in the mechanism?
Well, I think our terminology is confusing. You talk about seat allocation and mechanism differently.
No, same.
Same. Oh, okay. Then, so I'm talking about that too. And remember the Texas top 10%?
Yes.
Okay, so analogously, because research shows that the Texas top 10% increases the representation from sending high schools to UT Austin. So some sending schools which never got kids into UT Austin now got kids in. So it's a way to expand geographic diversity.
Got it. So can I just reflect back to you what I think I'm hearing? Okay, so if I understand you correctly, rather than the 20% being citywide, just generally, no? Okay.
So I'm not talking, yes, it's confusing because there's another thing on the table, which is that we have the first 20% citywide and the last 80% in the last year was zip code.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about that at all because in my mind, we should not go with 20% citywide in any mechanism.
Okay.
The data shows us that that's exclusionary. What I'm talking about is a Texas top at that time when they started the experiment, it was 10%.
Mhm.
Now they've adjusted because they're doing what we've proposed to do, which is study the outcomes every year. So
Mhm.
now I think it's 6%, but that's why I use X. So Monica Hogan can tell us what that percentage is once we decide what the groupings are, whether it's sending school opportunity index grouping or
Dr. Tung, can I just because I want to make, because I'm not following and I want to make sure that, and we've got a number of other people in the audience listening. So let me just, if we could just take these in chunks just so that we can all stay with you.
Yep.
So let me ask this question. So if I understand correctly, what you're suggesting is that X percentage, students that are in the X percentage of their class, okay, receive, if I'm hearing this correctly, would receive an invitation to an exam school.
So
is that?
Well, that's one way. We could also use that grouping, sending school opportunity index by lottery too. So
Okay, but let me just let me, because I want to make sure that everyone's following so that we understand kind of what the
I know
recommendation.
how I can clarify.
Okay.
So in every grouping, so let's say all of the sending schools with opportunity index from like 0.75 to 1.
So let me stop you there, Dr. Tung. Let me just, before you get deep in the weeds of the numbers, before you go there, let me just stay up from the concept, okay? All right, because I want to make sure that we're all following. So if I'm understanding this correctly, students who rank within X percent of their 6th grade class at a school would receive an invitation to an exam school. That's the first one. Before getting into the weeds, is that part of your recommendation?
One modification.
Okay.
Which is Ms. Garrett's point that not the grouping of that 97 schools.
Yep.
So yes, and the sending schools would be grouped by opportunity
index. Okay, got it. Okay, got it. Now, next question. How many of the seats would you recommend be allocated in that way? What percentage? Are you suggesting all of the seats be out? So 100%. Okay, so 100% of the seats, your recommendation for consideration would be no.
The word, my recommendation, I just want to be clear. I'm trying to contribute to the conversation.
Yes.
Okay, I think Mr. Acevedo was next, and then Ms. Lum, Ms. Garrett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Contemplazis. Just sort of going back to to Mr. Contemplazis' earlier suggestion, which is akin to what I was sharing on Friday, and just Ms. Sullivan, just going back to your terrific advice just now about going into the weeds. So I think I think it would be easier again, and I would agree with Mr. Contemplazis about viewing this deliberately in phases. I know that we're right. We've waded into the conversation about mechanisms. My question is, mechanisms for really which year, which is actually material, because on Friday we sort of got ensnared by bowling together fall 2021, which is very, 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 I think, distinct from fall 2022. And I am suggesting to use Ms. Tung's language, which I concur. I'm suggesting that maybe the easiest way, I know that it would be for me, I also believe that will be the easiest way to get to consensus is not just to divide our discussion of the mechanisms and the determination of the applicant pool into these years, but to begin into phases, but to actually begin with assuming that we're talking about fall 2022. Because I was about to, my next question, Sullivan, to you was, so everyone okay? What is everyone's thoughts about the mechanisms? And my response would be, well, which years? I think people may have a different approach to how we determine the applicant pool in the fall of 21 vis-a-vis the fall of 22. And it might be easier to bifurcate those two.
So I'm fine with doing that. I do want us to get to some decisions tonight. So if that makes people more comfortable.
Me too, absolutely.
So if that makes people more, if that makes people more comfortable, if you want to start with fall 22, that's fine. But let's get to a decision on this mechanism because I actually think we can. So anyone have thoughts on that? Ms. Lum? Including, right, so including what Dr. Tung just put on the table as well. So Ms. Lum.
I just have a question with regards to utilizing the opportunity index as one of the mechanisms, which is how do we do that for the non-BPS schools? Because the opportunity index only measures the BPS schools.
Dr. Tung?
I would put them in their own grouping.
Okay, all right. Question asked and answered. Ms. Garrett.
Thank you. My question was similar to Sena's. I appreciate Dr. Tung's thinking around trying to expand groups so that they're not so small, but related to the concern about non-BPS schools. There are very different types there. And so I would definitely suggest that, you know, a charter school with a more disadvantaged population and a very advantaged independent school shouldn't be in the same category. I know Ms. Hogan has mentioned before that we don't have all of the same access to the same indicators that we use for our own opportunity index. And so while I'm happy to engage in conversation around school type and thinking about things that way, I would maybe push us to think about the percent of economically disadvantaged students at the school as a proxy for opportunity index, just so that something could be more normalized across school types. So if we are thinking about some sort of set aside for students, you know, reserving a certain number of seats for students from specifically economically disadvantaged schools, I think all of those are possibilities, but I would encourage maybe using what's available from the state for all schools and putting it on the independent schools to prove that they meet that threshold, which most likely don't. But that would be my suggestion to Dr. Tung's, and to push us in the direction as Mr. Acevedo and Mr. C suggested, it could be a potential easy to understand mechanism for fall 22 to potentially think about set asides for specific students from school types or something that ensures diversity in a way that's potentially less complex than some of the other models that we've been discussing.
So Dr. Tung, how would you feel about using, rather than OI, as Ms. Garrett is suggesting, using a poverty index indicator?
Yeah, I think I was trying to think about Mr. Contampasis's suggestion around last week around you use the term, I think, high poverty schools, Mr.
Mhm.
Constance. And so
I see.
that's where my mind went to OI, which tells us a lot about socioeconomic status of students in schools, or the bulk of them. So I didn't quite catch all of what Ms. Garrett said, but I think, you know, my proposal also includes, you know, weights for some of the indicators that she just noted.
Right. So and let me just reflect back what I heard from Ms. Garrett, what I heard her say is where you were suggesting grouping schools by opportunity index. What she was suggesting is that given that we don't have OI scores for non-BPS schools, her suggestion would be, rather than use the OI index, to use a poverty index. So saying that a school, you know, is at a grouping schools based on their poverty levels of the students. Okay, so versus using the OI, because that would cover more of the school types that may be sending students.
Yeah, or we could just, besides the OI groupings, could have a charter school grouping, a METCO grouping.
Yeah, so I think the challenge with that is we need to ensure that all students who are Boston residents that we're not treating them differently based on the type of school that is sending them. That is the challenge that we need to, not the challenge, you know, that is a factor that we have to be mindful of, treating BPS schools differently or grouping schools by BPS, non-BPS. That is an issue for us.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Any way of grouping sending schools that takes into account SES.
Okay.
Would be great, but I know I'm taking up a lot of airtime, but my hand was up because I just one other option of groupings out there, and then I'll be quiet. So basically, you know, we used zip codes. We had 31 zip codes last year, and seats were allocated based on the median income of families with school-aged children of the zip codes, right? So overall, using geographic groupings increased diversity of the invitation pool compared to the previous year. But I think our recommendation could be informed by and improve upon last year's outcomes. And that's what I've been trying to think of, ways to include both neighborhood and SES factors. And so my second suggestion for us to think about is to combine what we learned about census tracts and tiers. So census tracts are geographic and tiers are SES. And the reason that tiers alone, like Chicago, are not ideal is because we could end up with very little representation in these schools from certain neighborhoods. So I'm suggesting that we combine census tract and tier information such that students in contiguous census tracts or census tracts in the same neighborhood of the same tier compete for a proportionate number of seats. I know it sounds complicated, but that's just because I'm at the beginning of thinking about this. I'm sure we can make it understandable.
How is that different than the recommendation that was already on the table to group census tracts?
This takes into account tiers. So for example, I think it's Rosendale.
Yeah.
Has mostly a certain tier, but there are 2 pockets of lower tier family of school-aged residents in a lower tier. So we want to group the 2 orange.
Yeah.
And have them in the same pool for either the lottery or the top 10%. And they get seats proportionate to the number of school-aged kids. And then we want to group the other higher tier kids in Rosendale, for example. I'm just using an example where there's
Yeah.
multiple tiers within a neighborhood.
So I'm just trying to, so if I'm recalling the maps correctly, so it, rather than grouping by tiers, which could be grouping by socioeconomic tiers alone, which could be, you know, a census tract in JP along with a census tract in Dorchester 02124. Rather than do that, it would be, what you're suggesting would be to group to put into a tier what would you do? You'd put what, JP and Roslyn? I guess I'm not following. What I'm not following is how that is not already happening. Can you just walk through that a little bit?
If we look at a map
Yeah,
and just look at 4 tiers,
yeah.
You'll see large swaths in the same tier. Like,
Actually, do we have, can Monica, one of Ms. Roberts or Ms. Hogan, can we grab one of the maps and throw it on the screen? At some point, that'd be super helpful to get the visual on this, but okay. Dr. Tung.
I'm just putting, oh, you don't want me to put the link in the chat, right?
We could allow you to share your screen if you have it up. Do you have your screen? Do you have the image?
A little scary.
Okay.
Yeah, I can do that.
Ms. Parvex, can you allow Dr. Tung to share her screen?
She should be able to share it. Everyone can share the screen. Dr. Tung, are you able to?
Yes.
Okay.
Super helpful. Thank you.
Just a sec. How do I get out of here? If it's this one, no.
While you're pulling that up, I'm going to go to Mr. Kreger and then we can come back while you're getting that.
And I'll just be brief. This is solely a question for Ms. Garrett. Ms. Garrett, as you were asking Dr. Tung about her proposal, I thought I heard you saying, you know, is there a simple, straightforward option for families to understand that involves some form of low income set aside? And I wasn't sure if you were introducing an additional proposal, but like all the others, I'm all ears and would love to know, what's on your mind.
Thank you, Mr. Kreger. I am loath to introduce a new proposal on June 14th, but if we are talking about phases, I guess I was potentially suggesting that a set aside specifically for students attending economically disadvantaged schools is a clear method that could serve potentially as a placeholder for a different mechanism. So, yeah.
And what would that look like, Ms. Garrett?
I was thinking actually about kind of, and I know this is something that was overturned legally some time ago, but was thinking about the set aside seats that used to be in place for the exam schools based on racial identities, which we know is not passing muster. However, with an economic circumstance that is race neutral, thinking about something very similar and setting the mark at all 3 schools so that Latin school included would be affected in the way that we would want in terms of neighborhood diversity, et cetera. So creating a set aside for, I know we talked that it's very difficult to do individual family circumstances, but I don't know many, I think if you bucket schools with very high percentages of socioeconomically disadvantaged students, I don't think there are that many students getting by in that way. and they're still attending schools that were likely challenged disproportionately, especially during this time. So that was as far as I got with the thinking. Back when in the 90s, that was in place, I believe it was a 35% set aside, but that could certainly be different based on current circumstances and the proportionality of the city.
I can share my screen now if you want.
Yeah, just one, yes, Dr. Tung, one moment. So Ms. Scarrett. And I know you're just formulating the idea. Can you tease it out a little? So if you did, again, just for the sake of the conversation, using if it were 35%, just use for the sake of conversation of a set aside for socioeconomic factors, how would you do the other 65?
You could potentially continue with the tier model for those seats and allocate them via ranking by tier, still using the census tracts. Or you could do some proportion of it citywide, or you can do the entire thing citywide and have a larger proportion for economically disadvantaged students. But I think the tiers allow for more variation across incomes is very important. And so I wouldn't want to lose.
Yeah.
And so I'm not totally sure on the other portion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on the tiers because I know that we spend a lot of time, and I think rightly so, focused on some of our most vulnerable students from an economic standpoint, but part of diversity is ensuring that there's certainly representation from a socioeconomic standpoint of students who are from wealthier families. Like there's value in that. So I appreciate the point on the tiers because the tiers would help to ensure that truly there is socioeconomic diversity at every end of the spectrum.
You could also flesh out what Dr. Tung suggested to the entire 100% by grouping the schools in bands the whole way, or maybe do a 20% citywide and then do an 80% grouping of schools. So you would have schools with 90% or higher economically disadvantaged have this percent of seats, and then you go in those bands as well as another option.
So that was the same, that's similar to my sending schools group by OI.
Exactly. I was just replacing that with the data point that's available to all school types, but it's exactly what you suggested, Dr. Tung. I would though say before we totally throw out the 8 tiers, I would ask what is the problem we're trying to solve with neighborhood diversity and the 8 tiers? Because I thought that Ms. Hogan modeled something that showed neighborhood diversity using the 8 tiers, and Ms. Hogan's previous models for our current admissions process were very close to actuality. And so I didn't know if there was a specific concern that we have that's moving us away from the 8 tiers, as I feel like we had reached some good energy around landing on 8 tiers. And so I wouldn't want to lose that for at least one phase before we walked to something else.
Yeah, so I can respond to that. I wouldn't, the tiered model I think is certainly still very much in play. The data, the simulations that were provided did not provide the analysis vis-a-vis using census tract data to be able to confirm that we are in fact preserving the type of neighborhood diversity that we saw with the interim policy. Part of the period there, and then you said part of the challenge is of course, when we run the simulations, it's the pool of students that we're the data that we're using to run the analysis that is presenting somewhat of a challenge, if you will. And so where we are right now is working to get additional data from the BPDA to be able to run a more rigorous analysis between, we have the census tract piece, but a more rigorous analysis on the, we have the tier piece, but to run a more rigorous analysis on the census tract option to be able to more readily compare kind of what each of them will yield. If it comes out pretty much even, it's a wash, then perhaps our focus will shift more toward definitively looking at the tiers as an option. If there is some discrepancy, again, working to preserve neighborhood diversity, then we need to figure out a way to work through that. But tiers are not off. I don't see that we're moving away from tiers at this point. It's just confirming with the data that we're getting the type of neighborhood diversity that we would like to see.
And is there a grid of by zip code currently?
That's what we're working on.
I thought that we've seen it though. No, I thought there was a projection using the 8 tiers of the applicants from the year before last by zip code.
That's with tiers, not with census tract data.
Aren't the tiers based on census tract? Aren't the tiers divided into census tracts?
They are divided into census tracts, but when we talk about, it goes back to Dr. Tong's point, you could have East Boston and 02124 in the same tier. Whereas if you were just a census tract in East Boston and a census tract in 02124 in the same tier. Whereas if you look at solely census tracts, we had talked about grouping them contiguously, right? You'd be looking at two similar census tracts within 02124.
I understand. I think my question was, why are we rearranging the census tracts if the model does show neighborhood diversity with the tracts as they are? And if it's a concern for potentially not giving enough priority or advantage to students in lower income areas, could the school type potentially solve for that as opposed to reconfiguring all of the tiers?
It is a possibility, but I think it is important to let the data drive the decision. And we're still waiting for that data to be able to make the final decision on that. Hopefully we will see similarities in the data such that, we can knock one of these options off the table and maybe get from 10 no, I'm just teasing, get from now five options down to maybe 3 or 4. That would be fantastic. Ms. Lum, did you have something? I saw your hand go up and then down.
Yeah, I was just trying to work out in my own mind. If you had 02114 competing with 02124 in the same tier, what would be the negative outcome of that?
Because you could end up with all of the seats within that tier going to 02124. Right. And if the goal is the neighborhood, if part of the goal is neighborhood diversity, and nothing is perfect, right? But what we know is that it is possible to have greater increased neighborhood diversity. And so again, just making it is possible that when we are able to run the census tract analysis, that we get similar. It's not going to be the same, but we get similar. That is possible. But at least from my perspective, it would be important to maintain as much neighborhood diversity as possible from the interim policy. Yeah, Dr. Tung, then Mr. Contam. Actually, Mr. Contampasas hasn't spoken yet in this round, so Mr. Contampasas, then Dr. Tung.
I would just like to suggest that what was introduced this evening as the Opportunity Index is something that we've looked at. I think it would be very difficult to implement it for the reasons that have been mentioned. And I also think it would be awfully difficult to explain that to a community who has to wade through all of this in such a way that they understand the end product. So there have been some additional issues. I think we need to wait to get that information from City Hall, take a look at it, and then look at something that addresses the issue that has been raised, but addresses it in such a way that can be easily communicated to all of the parties that we're hopeful we can attract to the exam schools.
Right.
And so the other piece is that any discussion around the tiers, I think somewhere along the line, I think Ms. Sullivan, you've raised the issue of possibly establishing a tier that looks at homeless, looks at students that may be under the care of DCF, and also some of the low-income housing. That might be another way of dealing with this. I think Ms. Skerritt has offered yet another point of view within the 8-tier system. I think we need to really think about the amount of time we have left to come up with closure on this. And talking about the mechanisms also requires us to go back and take a look at the qualifications for the applicant pool. And so I would just suggest that we take a look at the data, and then we go back to what has been the topic of conversation since the beginning of this process. And when I raised the issue of phasing, I was trying to address what we could possibly do in school year 23-24, and then come back to what might be feasible given the difficulty that many task force members suggested were of concern for the current school year, much like we did with the GPA. And I'll leave it at that. I think we have enough on the table to consider without adding what are complex issues like the occupational index or the opportunity index. And as has been made clear, the students whose parents have made a decision to send them elsewhere are going to have difficulty accepting this as being something that covers their concerns as well.
So Mr. Contampasas, my recollection is that Dr. Tung actually accepted Ms. Skerritt's suggestion that we, in place in lieu of using or considering opportunity index, that we would consider a poverty, some sort of banning. So I
apologize, I lost the connection here.
No problem.
We might have talked about that at that time.
Not a problem. So that's,
And we've already built something in on poverty index, if I remember correctly.
Yes, we have. So Dr. Tung, I see your hand raised. I do want to get to see, I know folks wanted to look at 22 first. Can we move toward a conversation about what could work for 22? It's 5:56. So Dr. Tung.
Then I'll just hold my second suggestion for how to group kids.
Okay, great. So 22, how are folks feeling about 22? Where would you lean with respect to an allocation of seats? We've got now 5, let's just say 4 recommendations on the table. One would be using the 20/80, 20% citywide, straight rank, 80% ranking within some grouping, whether it's tiers or census tracts. With, and this goes to Mr. Contompasis's point, a census tract that would be created similar to what we did with the zip code policy, but it would include, in addition to DCF, students who are DCF involved and those suffering from housing fragility, in addition to that, those living in BHA housing. Okay, so kind of think of that as one option. Another option is a qualified lottery. So it would be, you have to qualify, right, using that eligibility criteria, and then doing a lottery. Okay. The third that I heard was an allocation of seats based on essentially a student's ranking in their school, but those schools would be, it wouldn't be individual sending schools, it would be within schools that are kind of bucketed by their socioeconomic index, let's call it that, by their socioeconomic index. Right, and I'm assuming a straight rank within those groupings. And then the fourth being some sort of allocation of seats that would include that tier allocation by straight rank and an economic set aside of seats. So those are the 4 that seem to be in play right now, where we might be able to get some consensus, recognizing that, you know, we're not all 100% thrilled with all of the options, but those seem to be the 4 that we might be able to work with to get to some consensus here. Is that, yes?
Yeah, if I may, a couple of qualifying questions.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the qualified lottery,
Yeah.
are we talking about the 80% or are we talking about a 100%?
What I heard,
or both?
what I heard was the recommendation on the table was 100%. I'm just putting,
No, that's fine. And then when we're talking about the allocation of seats for socioeconomic standing, would that include a tiered structure within the tiers? In other words, you could do it in the 80% and have, as you suggested, 70% of the seats straight rank, 30% coming from some sort of lottery within each tier.
Yeah, that was weeks ago. Yes, we could.
And so I want to at least thank you for honing in on the 4 options, because, you know, we keep adding things and we'll never get to our deadline.
Okay.
Dr. Tung, your hand is up.
I think for any of those options, whether it's lottery or ranking, that the grouping determines the number of seats, because they should be proportionate to the size of the 6th graders in that grouping, whether it's sending schools or census tracts or tiers.
Wouldn't that mean that if possible that there would be a wide disparity within the tier?
And then for whether we do lottery or top X% as well, you either get extra balls in the lottery or points added to the score for being English learner or a student with disability or homeless or
No, I
DCF.
think I was asking, I thought that there was a recommendation that the seat allocation be as close as possible in those tiers. Was that not the case?
Proportionate.
So you're suggesting an equity factor similar to what we did with Dr. Tung, similar to what we did with the zip code model. However, what was presented to us in the simulations was really equal distribution of seats across the tiers. So each tier had the same number of seats and same roughly available. What you're suggesting is that tiers would basically have an equity factor based on the number of kids within that tier.
I think it has been, I think you both may be saying something fairly similar, because I think the size of the tiers were fairly proportional to begin with. I think that was what they were
equal. Remember, because Mr. Krieger had the question about like, well, how come you weren't able to get, if we're working toward equal distribution of the seats across the tiers, how come we've got such broad swings in some places?
And I think they worked to try to get them so that they didn't divide a tract in half or something like that, but it is very close to the size of the pool of number of students in each tier. I think it's, they got it as aligned as possible size-wise so that you could do an equal number from each one. So I think the equity factor was built into the way that the tiers were broken out so that the size was pretty reflective of the size of that grouping.
Okay.
Yeah, Monica sent adjusted charts that Ms. Parvex had sent to us, I think a week or two ago.
Okay, got it. Perfect. So I'll just put it out here. One of the challenge that I have with the straight lottery, citywide lottery, is that it doesn't address the geographic diversity factor. So if there were a lottery, for me, it would be important for it to be similar to like what we're going through with the tiers, is that it, you know, that it be along some grouping, whether it's tiers or census tract. But a citywide lottery, I think, puts at risk the geographic diversity. I'm going to go to Mr. Chernow, Dr. Tung first, and then.
Yeah, so I think just adding to the conversation, I would also be open to a lottery that in whatever way we decide still ensures neighborhood diversity. My question is, in this proposed lottery, would it be based on meeting or being above the grade level?
Yeah.
Or would it be just in rank? It wouldn't be ranking is my question, I guess.
As I understand it, it would be based on being qualified for the pool, which is the whole grade level conversation about, like, you know, and we'll get to that in a moment, but the student would have to be at or above the grade level as demonstrated by X factors, which we'll get to hopefully in the last 45 minutes.
Gotcha. And then, so once you're in that pool, when we say lottery, what does that mean? I guess is my question.
Who put lottery on the table? Oh, Dr. Grassa. Katie, Miss Grassa.
I put that on the table a week or two ago.
Yeah. So can do you mind responding to Mr. Chernow's question?
Can you say it one more time, Mr. Chernow?
Yeah, my question is just, when we're looking at the pool of students who have surpassed the at grade level test or grade, whatever that may be, when you say lottery, how is that? What does that look like? Is that just pure, like, put all the names in the hat and pick them out? Is that based on ranking? Is that based on per school?
Yep. I was originally thinking if we were going to do the 80-20, so that like 20% would be straight ranked into the schools as we did in our 1-year plan. And then the rest would be lottery. So you were one of the students that was invited, like you qualified, and then you were entered into the lottery, and you would potentially get a seat if your number was pulled.
So it's not a rank. It's you're in the pool and your number would just pop.
Correct, in the 80%.
In the 80%. Okay.
Yeah, because originally we had been talking about the 80-20. So I was thinking about like this could be a possible option for the 80% if we wanted to keep the 20% as strength ranks, the top performers, top 20% gets a seat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Dr. Tung?
I can't keep track of all my responses. But my proposal, Mr. Turnout, for how the lottery would work is once a student is eligible, they would get a ball in the basket. And for every category of added challenge, the student would get an extra ball in the lottery. So if you attend a high poverty school or live in subsidized housing, etc. And then 100% of seats would be allocated, but as Ms. Sullivan clarified for me, yes, they would be proportionate to the grouping that we end up using, whether it's sending school grouping, census tract grouping, tiers. That would be how my lottery would go.
Okay. Mr. Acevedo?
Ms. Sullivan, you used reference to a gut check some moments ago. I wish I had something more cerebral than a gut to offer at this moment. I'm going to try to coat a little bit more gray matter around it than just gut. But so little bit of institutional history, and it's not my gut that I'm trying to check, but here really the community, and maybe those of you who are closest to it could help articulate why back in October, when we were first introducing the temporary policy that we're now wanting to succeed with a permanent policy, we were very, very clear and explicit. You know, when people said, well, you've introduced a lottery, we were, one of the points of credibility for us was, no, you don't understand what we're doing. It's not a lottery. And we were able to to neutralize a community argument against the temporary policy by distinguishing what we took pains to distinguish what we were doing from a lottery. I guess because a lottery, here it is, just a guess of people's gut, just seemed very arbitrary. And that seems to also resonate with a lot of the pain that we are hearing from members of the public who have been making public comments, still even to this day, erroneously, referring to our policy as a lottery, even now. So I don't see the sense in saying, actually, you were right the whole time. You were right the whole time. It's actually a lottery. And especially if there are other, somehow it's like, it's Alka-Seltzer to the gut of the community, particularly the corners of this community, rightly or wrongly, that must yield some of their privilege in the name of equity. It's harder for them to do so when the mechanism is a lottery. And if we have other mechanisms that seem much more thought out less an item of, Atlantic City chants, it might be easier for the community to bear all of it. So that's my gut tonight, especially if we find other ways that get to the same thing, racial and economic diversity without employing an outright and deliberate mechanism of a lottery. I think I would feel more comfortable with it. And I think this year demonstrated that the community would too.
Ms. Aguirre?
Yeah, I completely agree with Mr. Acevedo. I mean, we made very clear that the process was not a lottery. So now, like, coming back to the lottery idea, I don't really kind of fully agree with that. And also I wanted to comment a little bit on Dr. Tang's idea that from my point of view, if it's a lottery, it's a lottery. But when you start adding extra balls on the basket for qualifiers, it is not a lottery anymore. So if we are going to be adding qualifiers, we may as well go with the other system that we are proposing, the SES or the tiers or something else, because a lottery is a lottery. I mean, it's like you have your ball and that's it. If we start adding qualifiers to the lottery, it's not really a lottery. It's much more complicated to explain. And I think that any of the other systems will do a better job of achieving what we want.
Mr. Chernow?
Thank you. I would just like to quickly go back to the point that Mr. Acevedo was raising. I wouldn't necessarily call it arbitrary, only because of the fact that involves it being completely random when the students that we are taking our quote unquote lottery from have all demonstrated that they are proficient or at grade level. So we're not just picking every student. Every student that is being chosen from has already demonstrated that they're quote unquote ready for an exam school. So I wouldn't necessarily use I don't necessarily agree that that's arbitrary, is what I'm saying.
Thank you, Ms. Lum, then Ms. Garrett.
I will just say I am also hesitant on the lottery idea, only speaking as a parent and having gone through the lottery process early on with school selection to begin with. There's a lack of transparency with the lottery, and I don't know if it's just by nature because it is a lottery, it's chance, but it was very hard to understand, even though it's probably a very simple process. And I would say that if we can be more thoughtful and deliberate and transparent about our considerations, that may go over, that may be a better way to communicate with the community than going back to a lottery system for the exam schools.
So is the lottery is what's what's akin to a lottery is what's used for other seat allocation in the district, right?
Yes.
You gotta put your name in for a particular school and then your number either pops or it doesn't. Okay, all right. Ms. Garrett.
Thank you. I share the concerns that Mr. Acevedo and Ms. Aguirre and Ms. Lum mentioned, but I do respect Mr. Chernow's point that it's not a random process, that there would be some sort of eligibility threshold with the proposal of a lottery. I think from the parent perspective, however, as long as that pool is bigger than the number of seats, it will feel arbitrary. And I think that especially for this class coming in, while they are of course expecting some adjustments through COVID, through what we just came through, et cetera, it is a very dramatic departure from what families have been expecting. And I don't know if it's necessary to arrive at the diversity that we seek. For me, the only place where I think there is potential to think about some level of lottery would be for the students who are already invited to the exam schools and the order that they might have in terms of choosing their schools. So meaning if there were 1,000 seats and the 1,000 students were selected into those seats, potentially there could be some room for the order that they get to pick amongst the 3 exam schools. And I say that with the awareness that Boston Latin Academy is an extremely diverse school. John D. O'Brien has more Black and Brown students than the district as a whole. We are here 4 hours a week because of Boston Latin School. And even if we took the 3 exam schools as they existed now and diversified them equally across the 3 schools, I'm not even sure we would be spending this much time. And so the order that students do get to select the schools does make a difference. And so in that way, I am open to that conversation, but I am extremely concerned about this actually wearing my parent hat more than my head of school hat, because to Mr. Chernow's point, we would, any student who is grade level ready is any student who is grade level ready. There, you know, it doesn't matter to me as a school leader, but as a resident of Boston and parent, and listening to the public comment as we have, I do have significant concern about a lottery in the method that has been described.
Mr. Condon-Passus, then Ms. Lum.
I think Ms. Skerritt echoed my opinion as well as I could. The 100% lottery also, I think, would create, as I think Mr. Acevedo was trying to get across, even more of a reaction in the city than we really should be thinking about. And we should be thinking about the impact. There is a way to get around this, and I think we have a couple of opportunities to discuss it further. But I, for one, would like to suggest that the 100% lottery for everyone who has qualified in the applicant pool simply using the grade point average raises the issue again of simply using the GPA as the sole criteria. And we do have evidence that that can be utilized incorrectly. So if we're not ranking the students of those who have qualified so that we come up with some semblance of order, what are we doing here? We're supporting a system that last year we suggested was somewhat flawed.
So, yeah.
No, I'm done.
All right. I want to
just to suggest and reinforce, I'm opposed to 100% lottery.
Okay. All right. So let's get to some, because, well, let me go, Dr. Tung. Oh, I lost Dr. Tung. Okay, Dr. Tung and then Ms. Lum. And then let's try to make a decision on whether this is in or it's out. With the caveat, as we move to, or with the note, on Wednesday, at the school committee meeting on Wednesday, Mr. Condon-Passus and I will present to the school committee 2 to 3 potential models for moving forward. Okay. So the question for us tonight is whether we currently have 4. Did I read off like 4, roughly 4? Can we get this down tonight? Okay, this is not the final recommendation, but can we get this, can we knock 1 or 2 of these kind of out of the discussion tonight? Ms. Lum.
I would like to say that if we can create a process that allows us to assign, to fill untaken seats. So invitations have been extended. People have decided they want to move their kids to private school or moving out of the district. There are seats available. I would be open to a lottery for those seats.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Interesting. Dr. Tung.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I agree on the need for transparency and whatever we propose to be easy to understand. And I would like to argue again for the lottery being still on the table. Mr. Contemplasis mentioned the reaction in the city. As we've seen, from the last week, the reaction in the city is already huge. And for me, we're working towards justice, and equity and justice aren't the same thing. And justice to me means breaking down the structures that maintain inequity, and exam schools do that. And so the lottery, as we've talked about in other meetings, takes away the shame, the embarrassment that students feel. It takes away the feeling that some students are better than others, and it's not good for the winners or the losers to have that. It mitigates all of the gaming that comes with privilege. It mitigates stereotype threat. And it takes pressure off teachers and administrators around grade inflation, if we have a test, teaching to the test, etc. And with a lottery, we can still meet our charge.
Okay, so this is what I'm going to suggest. Let's flip this. How do we feel about, or can we get some consensus here around including in our discussion on Wednesday the 2080 recommendation, whether that's 20, whether the 80% is census tracts or it's tiers? Do we have consensus to include that as one of the proposals? Or is there an objection to including that as one of the proposals? Can we be comfortable with that being on the table as part of our presentation? I don't see any objection. So that will be one of the proposals that's presented on Wednesday. Okay. The remaining three are some form of lottery, which we've just spent about 20 minutes on. Okay, we need to make decisions on it. Decision-making time, landing the plane time. What we haven't talked about is this proposal around top X percentage of students at each of the, let's say, groupings of schools by socioeconomic status, socioeconomic indicator. So top X percent. Yes, Ms. Garrett.
I might suggest that you would arrive at the same thing by still considering it to be rank, especially if the schools were typed. So I'm still not sure what top X percent means. If we have a fixed number of seats, let's say there were 10 tiers of school type, almost exclusively low-income students to independent schools that did not report any, all the way there.
Yep.
There were a set number of seats for each one, and students were ranked by the indicators we have not decided. I think, one, it's easier to understand, and two, it gets away from this idea of class rank in 5th and 6th grade. I think it's a broad enough number of students to bucket so that it doesn't eliminate the potential of 2 students from a very small school both getting a seat, but it still ensures diversity of school type. But I still can't get my head around what the top X percent would mean.
So it would, so I'm sorry, I missed the very beginning of what you said because I'm not, so how would you were saying you're not sure how that is any different than what?
Than a ranked order. I know we haven't selected the criteria yet, but replacing the tiers basically with school tiers sounds similar to what Dr. Tung is describing. I just am uncomfortable, or maybe not even uncomfortable. I don't fully understand the implementation of a top X percent, especially once we group students. So I think you could arrive at a similar diversity of neighborhood, school type, et cetera, if you maintained rank and simply, you know, had the set number of seats by those groupings. I did want to mention though that I know there are a wide variation of opinions around the exam schools on this task force, but I do believe it's an overreach of our charge to put in our decision-making the idea that exam schools are part of the landscape, or what I heard you say, Dr. Tung, is that part of your advocacy of a lottery is that exam schools are antithetical to an equity or justice system. And I completely understand and respect that that's the belief of many. However, I do not think that we were asked to address the existence of exam schools as they are currently structured in the city as part of our charge. And I do think that we have shown through the one-year policy and can show through our continued work together that we can arrive at a more diverse student body without exacting those very varied opinions on our policy. It feels beyond what we were asked to do. And I just wanted to mention that.
So I appreciate you sharing your opinion and perspective, Ms. Garrett, but I actually appreciate having an understanding of philosophically where all of our members stand on these schools, because from my perspective, it helps me to better understand why Dr. Tung may present a particular recommendation vis-a-vis what you or Mr. Contopasis might present, right? And so I actually deeply appreciate and respect the fact that Dr. Tung and others, apologies, Dr. Tung, for stating your name explicitly, but that members of the task force have trusted us as a group, and quite frankly, the world at this point, with their thinking philosophically, ideologically around these schools, because I think it presents the opportunity for deeper understanding as it relates to recommendations that people may present. So, Mr. Contopasis, your hand is raised, then Ms. Grassa and Ms. Aguirre.
Yeah, I doubt whether anybody is going to appreciate what I'm going to say, but it's, I keep hearing the charge. I'm not underestimating the importance of ensuring that students have access to the 3 exam schools. I'm not here to dismantle the exam schools. That's not our charge, plain and simple. And that may be my philosophical point of view, but folks, we made tremendous strides with trying to address some of the faults of the system in the 60s and 70s and the 80s. And we've made strides with the interim proposal that we put in place. And as Ms. Garrett has indicated, this is not a topic around Latin Academy and the O'Brien. It's a topic around Latin school. And everyone is entitled to have an opinion around dismantling exam schools. But that's not what we're charged with. We were charged with ensuring that as many students as possible have access. And we can continue to do that, but not at the expense of suggesting that just because I do not like exam schools, I want to eliminate them. That's not our charge, folks.
So this is what I'm going to do, is I'm going to call a timeout, because we are now going to get into a debate that is not going to get us to achieving our objective. Okay.
Agreed.
Okay, so let's get back on track here to talking about, I think the idea for mechanism that we're talking about in this moment is this one around, and it's X percentage. And I heard Ms. Garrett kind of your thinking around that. But again, the recommendation that is on the table is that, and for the sake of conversation, if this might make this easier for people to understand, that, you know, if a student is in the top 15% or top 10% of their applicant pool from their sending school, right, that they would receive an invitation to an exam school. And in order to address the concern about smaller schools or smaller classes, that we would group, that there would be some grouping of schools, similar to what we're seeing with the tiers, but that it would be grouping of schools to address the concern about the smaller class sizes, okay? The question for us is, this is the question, not whether this should be the policy. The question is whether this should be one of the recommendations that we share with the school committee. One of the recommendations we will tell the school committee we are still considering. That is the question. Ms. Grassa and then Ms. Aguirre.
Yeah, I just wanted to, my reasoning for lottery, and I'm not saying full lottery.
Wait, are you going back to lottery?
Well, that's what my hand has been up since, but if you would like me to not go there.
It's fine, go ahead.
I want to speak on behalf of students. And I think if we're thinking about a policy on behalf of our students, it is a policy that could achieve all of our goals and wouldn't be pitting students against students and who's smarter and who's not based on, frankly, whatever it is right now, one test on one day of your life or a grade during a pandemic. And so that's my 2 cents on it.
Yep.
So you would support the inclusion for us to continue to consider a lottery in some way, and that be part of our presentation on Wednesday.
That is correct.
Okay. Ms. Aguirre.
My apologies, but my hand was also raised regarding the lottery.
No problem.
And I was thinking that since we have, as you say, we have spent 20 minutes talking about the lottery, and I think that quite a few of the people who spoke about it were not really in favor of it. Maybe it will be more efficient before we move to something different. Just to have a quick round and to see like how many people will be in favor of considering the lottery as a proposal and who will not. And maybe that could clarify if this is an option or not. And as much as I am not really in favor of the lottery, I thought that Ms. Garrett's idea of using the lottery for the people who are already invited, for the order they will choose the exam school, I thought that was an interesting idea. And that probably will really bring way more diversity to BLS. I thought it was kind of an intriguing proposition that I would like to kind of talk more about.
Okay, so all right, so let's deal with the lottery. So are folks comfortable with us including a lottery? This is gonna be a 2-part question. First part of the question, are folks comfortable with us including a lottery as part of our presentation on Wednesday? Or is there an objection to that? Recognizing, as I stated, we're only going to present, what did I say? 2 to 3? Oh, 3. Yeah, no more than 3. Okay. So, and we've got 1 in the mix already. Is there an objection to including a lottery as part of that conversation? So Mr. Compton-Passos and Ms. Garrett object. and Mr. Acevedo objects. Okay. And Ms. Aguirre objects. So 4 people object to including a lottery as part of the conversation. That leaves the majority comfortable with including it as part of the conversation. Okay. So we will include it as part of the conversation on Wednesday. Okay. That said, second part of my question is, if it is, since it will be included as part of the conversation, then the question becomes, in what way? Is it for, and we have 2 potential ways to include it, either as part of the initial seat allocation process, right? The mechanism for seat allocation, which would be, we've got all of the young people who have qualified, whether that is assessment, GPA, essay, whatever we determine, right? Or whatever we end up recommending, right? So the qualified in the pool, okay? So it's straight allocation based on the qualified pool. Okay.
Ms.
Yes.
Sullivan,
Yes, Mr.
would it be easier just to simply list it? Because we may be getting into the weeds here. What we probably should do is indicate that one of the items that we're considering is some qualified lottery.
So I would prefer
Look at
not
that.
to. So I would prefer not to do that, which is, so if I may finish.
Okay.
So one option would be a straight lottery, okay? The whole pool, straight lottery. Another option that I thought I heard some potential consensus around would be a lottery within, let's say for the sake of the conversation, tiers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so of those 2, is there a preference? Rather than just throw this over the hill, I would love to be able to kind of give a little bit of a narrower scope for not only the school committee to react to, but quite frankly, our city at large. So lottery, everybody citywide, lottery within some grouping of tracks or whatever. Mr. Chernow, I see you nodding your head. What would you suggest?
I think I'm leaning towards lottery within some sort of grouping. I'm not sure what that grouping would be, but we've talked about a bunch. But yeah, because I think that would be a big factor to help provide neighborhood diversity among the lottery.
Okay. I see noddings of heads on that.
Yeah, Ms. Sullivan, I'm not sure how you want to record distinguishing one or the other.
Yes.
I would prefer the latter.
Yeah.
If we must include lottery at all. Frankly, to be even more specific, if we're going to include the lottery at all, it would be as Ms. Scarrett suggested, to distinguish between those who have been invited to the pool and to distinguish perhaps which schools, if all things being equal, they would be assigned to. But that would be a version, wouldn't it? Of what you were talking about. So however it is that you want to distinguish between your first choice and your second choice. I don't know if you want us to raise our hands.
So we can,
and then raise our hands for the second.
So let me say this. Is there an, because I'm looking at the heads nodding, and it sounds to me like the preference would be some sort of grouping, whether it's by tier or census tract or school, but that the preference would be not to have an at-large lottery, or to present as an option an at-large lottery is what I hear. That's what I'm seeing. Thumbs up, I'm seeing heads nodding. So we will include lottery that is within some grouping. So it wouldn't be at large.
Right. So I just want to make a distinction too, that the suggestion Ms. Scarrett made is more about assignment than it is about invitation and selection.
Right.
So a lottery for assignment is different from a lottery for selection. I would be open to a lottery for assignment if we're talking specifically about having lottery as an option for selection. I'm open to having it as one of our options. I don't know if it's my personal favorite option, but I'm open to having it as an option for selection, perhaps within tiers, as we've been talking about. But I do want to distinguish that there's lottery for selection versus lottery for assignment.
Right. And so
Full assignment.
So let's tease that out so that everybody's on the same page. So lottery for assignment would be for example, you're in your tier, you've qualified, you're broken into your tier, everybody's in the little thing in the bucket, and your name pops up. And that's lottery for
your choice, your school choice.
For your school choice, and you'd be going first.
Right. So you could do it, I mean, you could get into the weeds of how you want to do school assignment by lottery, but generally speaking, all the students who have been selected for invitation gets thrown into a pool. You can throw them, you can pull out each one, and whoever gets the first pick gets their first choice, and you keep going down the road.
So I guess I'm not following because I don't see the clear distinction, primarily because we have a qualifying pool. So I'm not following where the distinction.
Because I guess if there are more people choosing BLS than the other two schools, then if you don't use a lottery for assigning the school that they will go to, you could have a number of students who chose BLS as their top choice not getting in because of rank, right? Isn't that how school choice works?
Yeah, so I'm not following this at all. Actually, now I'm more confused because I actually thought it was more straightforward than what I'm hearing. Again, my understanding of this was that, and Ms. Scarrett would love for your clarification. My understanding on this was that students are qualified, whether that is a cutoff of a B or better, or it is by some ranking. We have yet to get there, right? But you're in the pool, and then you're put into for the sake of this conversation, your tier.
Right.
So you've got 500 kids in that tier for the sake of the conversation. Then you've got a lottery for the seats. And if my name pops up first, and I get to say, based on the seats that are available, I choose the O'Brien.
Right. So this is where the distinction is for me. I would say that there would not be a lottery for, so you have 500 students who qualify, then you would pick, if there's only 100 seats available, let's say, you rank those 500 students, the top 100 are automatically invited.
Yep.
But within that 100, you throw them into a lottery and figure out which school they go to.
Okay.
So it's not, I don't know. I'm just saying that if the idea is not to, if school choice heavily favors BLS and there are not enough seats at BLS for all of the options, or not all BLS top choice students can get into BLS, a lottery for school assignment, whether you're going to BLS, O'Brien, or BLA, could be.
So I want to give Ms. Scarrett an opportunity to clarify, and then I do have a comment on this. Now I do have a comment on this.
Thank you. Ms. Lum is correct that I was referring to a lottery for assignment and not for selection. I'll try to give an example for clarity. If there is an eligibility threshold, regardless of criteria that we determine, and there are 3,000 or 2,000 students who've reached that threshold in the city. The exam schools still only have 1,000 seats.
Yep.
I personally do not support, what I was objecting to was a lottery process that then chose arbitrarily amongst those students for the 1,000 seats. And I think Ms. Lum is expressing that she's unsure about. What I was suggesting is that we determine another method to invite the 1,000 students for exam school seats.
Mm-hmm.
I would be open to a conversation around how those 1,000 students who will be attending the exam schools are assigned to the 3 exam schools to go back to the point about the varying range of diversity amongst the 3 schools.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, 2 totally different systems. I would definitely not support using both at the same time. That's basically doubling the, I understand the objection to the word arbitrary, but it's doubling the chance of the process to use a lottery on selection and then another lottery on assignment. So I ask the folks who actually are recommending lottery for selection, they would still need to develop a mechanism to do what I'm describing, which is to rank the students to allow them to choose. Maybe they're suggesting that that should also be lotterized.
So to me, that's too complicated. And I just want to I want to go back to something that Mr. Contampasas shared at the beginning. We got to have whatever is proposed. There's this task force is filled with brilliant minds. And, you know, I'm sure we are able to come up with probably the most complex, intricate selection process that will yield phenomenal results on the back end. However, we have to present something that is easy enough for our city to understand, right? And so if it's too complicated, then we're not all going to understand it, and people are going to be concerned. That's the transparency piece. We got to simplify this thing. So if it's a lottery that we're recommending, I'm just going to put on the table, like for a lottery, if a lottery's on the table, what I would be comfortable including as part of the conversation on the table for Wednesday is qualified pool. That's where we begin. Qualified, which gets to the point of what I've heard over and over again, is that if a child can demonstrate that they're at grade level based on whatever the criteria that is selected, then they're ready to learn day one in any one of these schools, and that the schools have the supports in place to be able to support the child in their learning. So whether it's, 500 kids, whether it's 2,000 kids for 1,000 seats, or it's 1,000 kids for 1,000 seats, all of them, when we get finished with this qualifying criteria, all of them will be ready day one. So what I would be comfortable presenting is, and I'm going to go back to kind of the tier piece, what I would be comfortable presenting is that we're considering talking through what it could look like if there were a qualified lottery within tiers.
And you might also want to include some combination thereof, as you and I have discussed.
Right,
that's within the grouping.
Yep, within the grouping. Yep.
Okay, let's lock that one in and move on.
Got it. Are you all okay with that? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Zoe. You have just been an affirming face throughout this evening's proceedings. Thank you. Okay. All right. So we've got two. Now, for the final slot for tonight, it really is going back to this X percentage, or doing some sort of set aside. My question for the group is, I'm gonna switch it up. Do you have a preference about kind of that third slot vis-a-vis kind of this X percentage of sending schools versus using some sort of set aside for socioeconomic status? Again, please keep in mind what I shared and what Mr. Contopasis has shared about like wanting to have a process that certainly achieves our mission, but is not overly complex.
Ms. Sullivan, I do have a preference there. But again, how would you want us to express that preference to you?
Could you share
Yeah.
it? Could you verbalize it? Yeah.
Well, for whatever it matters, and again, like you said, I'm sharing this with many brilliant minds here. My gut feels more comfortable with this socioeconomic set aside, with the huge proviso that we could do so within constitutional muster. So if we could achieve constitutional muster for some sort of socioeconomic, race-neutral set aside, I would prefer that, particularly in the Boston Public School District, with such a broad diversity of sending schools, as has been, referenced all our conversations about that. So yeah, but it'll be a long night. You've got, 7 minutes to 7 to do that with what you've just done with me with everybody else.
Yeah.
But
Okay, Dr. Tung.
I'm not sure I know what you mean by economic set aside, and is there precedent for it? Have we studied other places that have done that? I know that with top X% by sending school grouping or any other grouping, that we have information from other places that have done it. So I'm just, I don't think I understand set aside.
That's a great point. Ms. Garrett, you put the recommendation on the table.
I haven't studied other districts. I'm just most familiar with and the set aside policy that I attended BLS under back in the day, and I know that the reason for that for that change was due to a legal challenge where it was determined that it could not be done for racial set-asides. So my question was I was more thinking about the school type as the set-aside than students' individual economic status, especially in light of the challenges we've heard around accessing that information for each individual student, and thinking more about the school they attend, which can be very tied to their available resources and preparation. So it felt like a substitute that could be pursued.
So what super helpful. So I know Mr. Keating is on the line. I would ask perhaps if we could take a look at whether using a socioeconomic set aside would be legally permissible. I don't know that there are, many of us have spent years researching this topic. I have not come across in the years that we've been studying this topic, this type of set aside. And so I don't know whether, and this goes to Mr. Acevedo, to your point, I don't know whether it would kind of pass the legal muster that we needed to pass. So Mr. Keating, if your team could take a look at that for us, that'd be super helpful.
We'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Dr.
Tung?
How would this set aside factor in neighborhood diversity?
It wouldn't, would it?
I think if it were by, no, I mean, I mean, I think it would have to be modeled like anything else. But if the schools, yeah, I don't have an answer for that. But I didn't think that it was to the exclusion of also using tiers. So they could be used in concert was this point.
So for Wednesday, my only, so this is where I will weigh in, right? I certainly think this idea, Ms. Scarrett, that you raise is an intriguing one. However, I'm mindful that of where we are, right? And so it's newly introduced today. And I'm not sure we have not just the general information, but the data we need in order to include it at this point in time with the time we have left, because whatever we present must be well-researched and data-driven. So that is truly my only hesitation at this point in keeping it on the table. Ms. Lum?
Were we looking at the set aside as in combination with, for example, an 80-20 rank, or were we looking at the set aside as 20% set aside, and I'm just using the same model, 20% set aside for socioeconomic considerations, and then 80% straight rank by tier?
I see what you're saying. So, okay, so, right. So what, do you understand that question, Ms. Garrett?
I do. You can do the operation several ways. You could rank the entire applicant pool if we had criteria that allowed you to rank, and you could go and fill the economic set aside seats first, so that those students fill the seats, and then you go back to your tiers, or you go back to whatever grouping method and continue to fill the seats in that way. And then you have the guaranteed and priority seats first. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't get students beyond that by going through the additional tiers, but that's one way that it could operationalize.
Mr. Contemplazis.
When we discussed the separation of whatever, 80% into the tiers, everyone that's in that tier has gone through a series of criteria that are based on socioeconomic standing, correct?
In the 80, if we did tiers, 80%.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so we had indicated that we'd try to find some sort of equal number of seats for each tier.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it just simply be easier to go ahead with the tier selection by rank order for a certain percentage, and then a second percentage, whatever that may be,
Mm-hmm.
to be determined in each tier by lottery? People would understand that. And, you know, a lot of this obviously is going to be dependent on, all we can say, Wednesday, is that there will be a qualified applicant pool. And so we've spent a couple of hours going over additional things. We need to look at whether the tiers give us the kind of neighborhood diversity that people are looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But if we look at the tiers themselves, everybody in a tier will have gone through the same sort of review. They will be, you know, if we want to set aside a lottery for some of those students, fine. I just don't, I think that's simplistic and people can understand it.
So what I hear you suggesting is, essentially not to include as a recommendation the either of these last two, the set aside for socioeconomic or the X percentage, but rather to present an 80-20 option, or an option that which with the 80% straight rank within the tiers, as we've talked about, or an 80-20 option where within the 80%, which is you say 70% was straight rank and then 30% lottery.
Yeah, for the remaining seats, with one caveat.
Yeah.
And that is that there be a tier established under the criteria that we've discussed before.
Yep.
And so that can be explained. It can be put out so even the Globe gets it. And we might be able to move forward. It's not going to, you know, and again, I'll leave it at that. But it can be, that comes back to how are we going to suggest this? And I think 15 minutes ago, we talked about in some sort of grouping. That's all we should say. Because if we get into the weeds, you know as well as I do, we will be inundated with emails, nasty letters, and all sorts of things.
How do people feel about that? Okay, so let me recap what I'm hearing, and correct me if I don't get this right. 2080, but I'm hearing 3 options for the 80. I'm hearing the 80 tiers again, and I'm using tiers and census tract interchangeably until we get our data, right? But tiers, straight rank within the tiers as one option. I'm hearing 2080, 80 within the 80% tiers with 70% of the seats allocated straight rank, 30% allocated by lottery. I'm hearing 2080, 80% tiers. This was the last piece. I just want to know if it's still in there. Tiers, but then lottery. So straight rank, lottery, or a hybrid for the 80. I see folks processing. Just take a minute. I'm going to give it 1 more minute, Ms. Lum, and then I'll come to you first. I just want to give folks a second to just digest that, because I see the wheels turning.
Ms. Sullivan, actually, I have a question.
Okay.
Not for you, but for my esteemed colleagues. I really I've appreciated hearing the distinctions. And this has been, and what has helped me just appreciate it, is that it's actually been diagonal. That we've had, you know, different groupings here actually be able to distinguish tier, you know, the use of tiers versus the zip codes or the 80-20, or even viewing the tiers and the data, given the data that we've seen from the potential of the tiers as perhaps as a mechanism to replace what we were doing with the 80-20. And I'd love to hear more illumination from that, precisely for that, from this group. Maybe it's a reason why your wheels are turning, but some days back, the conversation about distinguishing, that perhaps the tiers could be used as a way of getting at what we were trying to get at with the 80-20, but more cleanly and perhaps more equitably. But if I misunderstood that conversation from days back, I'd love to be illuminated from the people on the screen now.
So I'm not sure I follow you. Are you suggesting, Mr. Acevedo, not to use the 80-20, but to use 100% straight tier? Is that what you're putting on the table?
What I'm saying is I heard some good commentaries. What I thought I heard was suggesting that days back, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Okay.
More clarification from that, from the people who I thought were advocating that.
So that's yet another option that you have now brought back onto the table at 7:07, which is fine, but let me just close that line. Just fine. Mr. Contemposis is not pleased. Mr. Contemposis is not pleased, just so you know.
Okay. Whoops, didn't mean to do that.
Miss Lum.
So I'm actually hearing kind of still three options. One is an 80-20 option. So the common denominator amongst all three options is the tiers, whether they're census tracts, social, whatever. So that, like you, all of the options would be grouped by tiers. The first option is the 80-20, where the 80% can be divided up as you suggested. I also hear
straight rank.
A straight rank for the 100%, 100% straight rank for each tier.
Yeah. Well, let me, Miss Lum, one moment. Let me just take you back to the 2080. How did you, on your first 2080, how was the 80 broken down?
I think you have, it's almost like sub options under the first. So the 2080 there's always going to be in that option, the 20% citywide rank. And then within each tier, the 80% may be under consideration straight rank.
Correct.
Which would then be 100%.
So that's
really
one option.
Right. Or the hybrid option or the straight lottery option within the 80%. But if you're straight ranking the 80%, that's actually straight ranking the whole tier, right? Or not? No, it's not, because you've got the 20% is not by any status whatsoever.
So again, I want this to be simple for people.
Right.
So let me repeat what I stated initially. So option one, and I'm not including, for the sake of this conversation, what Sam just put on the table. I'm just restating what I said about 5 minutes ago. Option one would be 20% allocated citywide based on a straight rank, 80% allocated by tier, straight rank.
Right.
Option one. Option two, 20% allocated straight rank citywide, 80% allocated within tier by lottery.
Right.
Simple. And then the third option being a hybrid of those two, where it would be 20% allocated citywide straight rank. When you get to the 80% of those seats, still breaking them into tiers with 70% of the seats allocated straight rank, 30% of the seats allocated by lottery.
Right. So I'm hearing that, but I think I'm thinking more meta in the sense that 80-20 is one of the options, and how that 80% is allocated is still under consideration. And then the second big option I see is straight lottery by tier. And then the third option I see is straight rank by tier.
Okay, so I'm trying to narrow us down, and you and Mr. Acevedo are bringing us out again. So, well, okay, like I'm trying to funnel here, and you all, we're doing umbrellas. That's okay. Mr. Contemposis is now even,
I don't think Ms. Lum is saying anything different than what we've said before. if we focus on the 80%,
Yeah.
one way to select the 80% is in rank order by tier,
Yep.
right? One way to choose the order is by 100% lottery in all of the tiers. I think that's what I hear you saying. And the third is our 70-30 model.
That's what I stated, but Ms. Lum indicated that there's something else.
Well, I think what I'm trying to understand is, and if I'm backtracking, I know that we agreed 80-20 was one of the models. I don't know if we all came to agreement that 20% citywide was absolutely one of
Got
the
it.
criteria.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. All right. So we've got 3 potential models, and we are now putting back on the table 100% lottery, just citywide. Is that what you all are? Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm still suggesting tiers, like tiers across the board. But you can either break that tier up 80-20, or you can keep the tier intact at 100%.
So, okay, so what you're saying is another option
Four.
is.
That's 4
break-
options.
Yes, this is 4 options. So what you're saying is to have 100% lottery, but the lottery, qualified lottery, right? But that it would be, the lottery selection would be by tier. Okay, all right. Do we have a 5th option?
Well, the other option that I was saying.
And again, we have to get, let me just say
Right.
this, task force members, we have spent hours upon hours together. I so deeply appreciate how challenging this is for us. But it is landing the plane time. And our charge for Wednesday is to get this down to 2 to 3. I'm at 3 now, we're to 3. So if we can do that, like, we're golden here. So Ms. Scarrett.
Can I propose what I heard that gets it down to 3 with an asterisk?
Asterisk, yes.
I don't know if we can get it lower than 3 with an asterisk. I'm feeding my child popsicles, trying to get through this meeting. He's on his last leg, y'all. There's a ranked by tiers, there's lottery by tiers, and there's hybrid by tiers.
Yes, indeed.
Any of these 3 models, you can choose to do a citywide pullout or not.
Okay,
That's
All
it.
right.
fine, great,
3 with that.
fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to say.
Great, done. Wait. Do we have consensus on that? Yes.
We don't have
It's like,
consensus.
absolutely.
Consensus on whether we like them.
Yes, we do.
Whether you're presenting them, I'm reluctantly conceding, but I don't concede that I like them, but.
Listen, this is where we are. Okay.
Yeah.
Ms.
Thank you.
Dr. Tung.
Oh, I just wanted to say that it's a simple 2x3 table, with X's.
Oh, indeed it is. You're right. So we can do that. Perfect. The skies have opened. Yes, Mr. Chernow, look up. Look up. Okay. All right. So now I'm so nervous. Well, okay. So done. Consensus. Okay. It's 7:16. Let me just recap where we have consensus at this point. We have consensus on mechanism for seat allocation, which we just spent this meeting discussing, so I won't rehash that. Okay. Now moving back upstream to the qualifying pool, where we have consensus is with respect to GPA. So what we, right, and how we'll think about GPA. Mr. Contemposis laid that out at the beginning of the meeting, right? where we need, and we have consensus, I believe, on the, if we're creating like a composite score, we have consensus on including the 10 points to students who attend a high poverty school. Is that right? What we still have left open is assessment. We have this conversation around absolute score versus growth. We have if an assessment is to be included, and we have this discussion around additional kind of factors. So whether we're talking about whether we're talking about an educator validation, or it's some, kind of a student choice in terms of how they, something that they might want to include to give a more holistic perspective of view of who they are behind the numbers, so to speak. I see, Dr. Tung, I see your hand, but just give me 1 second, please. So those are two major significant questions that we've got to wrestle with in our next couple of meetings. My question is, because I want to get this off the table if possible. We've heard we've heard from the experts, academics. We've heard from, exploring kind of what other school districts do with respect to these schools. And we've also heard in public comment a concern about using grades alone. Okay. Can we say as a task force that there is agreement that we will not use grades alone? Can we agree to that? I see heads nodding. See heads nodding up and down as in yes. Okay. So
I'm sorry, could you please repeat that, Ms. Sullivan?
yes. Can we come to agreement that we will not use grades alone as an eligibility factor, that there will be something or some things else, other criteria that will be considered other than grades? I'm just trying to understand what, make it plain where we agree that it will not just be, because we've come to that consensus around grades. So I want to be clear with with parents and educators and family and stakeholders who are watching, that although we've come to consensus with respect to grades, that as a task force, we are looking to have other qualifying factors. Does that answer your question, Mr. Acevedo? You good? Yeah, okay. Okay, Dr. Tung, thank you for that.
Well, to answer your question, I'm not sure, because I don't know that we've come up with any other things that could go into the decision besides grades. And I was fine with grades for multiple subjects and multiple years.
Okay.
And I forgot why I raised my hand to begin with.
So Ms. Lum.
We've stated many times that ELA and math is the consistent class given 5 days a week. In lieu of MCAS scores, so this is a phase 1 question. Are we able to use students' final exams in math and ELA in sixth grade as a criteria for phase 1?
So Ms. Lum, we resolved this matter on Friday. So as I understand it, coming out of Friday's meeting, what we, so I'm not trying to bring up the GPA conversation again. What we agreed to on Friday was that for this upcoming selection year, as it relates to GPA only, GPA.
I'm not talking about GPA. I'm talking about the final exam score, not the final grades, but the final exam score for math and the final exam score for ELA.
I understand that. I'm just going to restate what we agreed to on Friday, was that for this coming fall, we would consider that it would be GPA, it would be grades from the first, I think it was the first and second quarters or the first trimester, depending upon how the school does their grades. For sixth grade, all four, ELA, math, social studies, and science. That was the agreement on Friday. And that, yep.
I must have misunderstood then, because I thought we were agreeing upon the GPA component, but I didn't realize that was the sole criteria for phase one.
It is not.
Oh, it is not?
It is not. So just to be clear, what we agreed to on Friday only dealt with GPA. So my question just a moment ago was, can we also agree that GPA will not be the only factor?
Right. Right.
And there was agreement to that. So what that means is we still need to make a decision as a task with Dr. Tung's exception, but otherwise there was agreement to that. So then we need to next, not tonight, but in our upcoming meetings, we need to make a decision about what those additional factors will be. And the factors that have been on the table for our consideration are in assessment, educator validation, and some sort of like student choice, whether it's student work, whether essay or writing sample or something of that, or video. I think I heard someone make a recommendation on that. But we need to make a determination on what those additional criteria will be to go alongside the GPA.
Right. So again, my suggestion is, which is for phase one, is looking at, I don't know, was it sixth grade or fifth grade MCAS that used to be, that we used fourth grade MCAS this last year. We talked about the MCAS not being an assessment for consideration because of the lack of consistency with regards to MCAS even being delivered and being taken. But from what I understand, every student in fifth grade, they still had an ELA and a math final exam. So could we not look at final exams, or they did not? That's when I guess I'm asking. If there isn't a final exam given in fifth grade for math and ELA that could be used in combination or as a filter or however we decide to use it with GPA, then in sixth grade, then maybe I just don't understand the way school was done in a pandemic year with regards to exceptions, but I was wondering if
I don't think that there is not one that is given at the end of fifth grade to use.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Garrett, did you have your hand raised? Or
yeah, I understood what Ms. Lum was asking and was providing the same answer as Ms. Grassa, that there would not be universal availability of the data that Ms. Lum is suggesting.
Great, thank you. All right, so I am grateful to the task force, and I know Mr. Contopasis is as well, that we were able to make some decisions here to narrow this thing down. Okay. I think that we are moving, we're moving forward, right? We're not making lateral moves here. We're not moving backwards. We are moving forward. Which is always in this work, kind of, at least for me, that's what I'm looking to do, is like, are we moving forward? Okay, so thank you for really the rigorous conversation, the thoughtful conversation and debate, the data-driven conversation and debate, and for really working with us to be able to funnel this thing down, and for the extra time tonight.
So let me just to, for my own sake, just to put to bed what we've decided. What we've decided were options on these mechanisms, but we don't have consensus on the mechanism itself.
Correct. That's where I was going to, in terms of kind of where we are. Okay. So for us, for Mr. Condompasas and I on Wednesday, well, actually, let me finish what I was saying before, where we still need to make some decisions as a group. And I will say this week, Thursday, top of the agenda, we're talking assessment, and we're talking the other factors. We gotta get that done. Okay. But for the purpose of Wednesday, we will present to the school committee with respect to qualification pool that GPA will be a factor, and we'll lay out kind of where we are, what we're thinking about, right, generally speaking, and that we still have in play for consideration assessment, essay, educator validation, kind of those other factors that we need to come to some decision on. As it relates to mechanism for seat allocation, we'll present the, what did you say, 2x3, Dr. Tung? We'll present the 2x3 model so that they understand kind of what is currently under consideration by the task force. And following our meeting on Wednesday, the 16th, we will then spend 7 to 10-ish days, not only continuing our work in this way, but we will also have some additional opportunities to hear from the public on kind of where we are, to help us generate what will ultimately be a final recommendation. So talk about how difficult it was to make a decision today, narrowing this thing down to 3-ish. Decisions just have to be made by the end, within the next few weeks with a recommendation. Okay. So we still have time to do that, but I just want to make sure that we're all just kind of understanding kind of where we are on the roadmap here. Dr. Tung, and then Mr. Condompasas, and then we're going to public comment.
With little time left, can I make a couple of data requests based on the fact that we're still not settled on which, we've settled that there should be groupings, either by sending schools, census tracts, or the tiers, but we don't have simulations. For example, we don't know whether the 8 tiers do give us neighborhood diversity. And we don't know what simulations would look like if we grouped sending schools by, or however we decided around poverty.
So that actually was not part of the final, or not part of the groupings that we were preparing to present on Wednesday.
So the groupings are either by tier or by census tract?
By tier or by census tract, yes.
So we lost the grouping by groups of sending schools.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And the other, I would just simply suggest we have, after Thursday, one meeting to come to consensus, one way or the other.
Okay, but
We can ill afford to ask for more data other than what we have on the table now.
Oh, right, so simulations, definitely, we need to,
Right.
we will request simulations, yes.
right, and the reason I'm asking for groupings of census tracts is because Ms. Garrett, there's 187 census tracts.
Yep, that's right. That's right, clear on that, and hopefully that will be part of what we are provided with, that I consider that as part of the outstanding data request. But we can definitely ensure that we are doing a double check on kind of what the outstanding data requests are in order to get the simulations we're looking for, because we do need the sims to be done. So we'll get to that. Yeah. Public comment?
Yep.
Ms. Parvex?
Thank you, co-chairs. We have 12 speakers this evening, and each speaker will have 2 minutes per person. Speakers who need interpretation will have additional 2 minutes. I will remind you when you have 20 seconds left. Please state your name, affiliation, and what neighborhood you are from before you begin. When I call your name, please raise your hand virtually in Zoom. Also, make sure you're signed into Zoom with the same name you used to sign up for public comment. That will allow us to identify you when it's your turn to testify. I will move you up as a panelist and will ask you to turn on your camera for public comment. Our first speaker this evening is Suri Yang, followed by Tiffany Luo and Sherry Kelleher. Suri Yang, please turn on your camera and unmute yourself. You can start.
Okay, you can start.
We shouldn't use group as a factor for who gets into the BLS, as it doesn't give everyone an equal opportunity. Now, I'd like to give you a scenario. Say a student earns 92 on ELA and another earns 76. Now think which has the most space to grow. The student that earns 76 has more space to grow. If we calculate it based on growth, it'll be tough for higher scoring students. If you scored 100, then your chances at getting admitted into the BLS are greatly decreased, as 100 minus 100 is 0. The higher scoring students are at the top of the staircase and can only go down. The only way for a high scoring student to get in is to get questions wrong on purpose, which is quite counterintuitive considering that it's a school to help them learn. It is simply not fair to give a handicap to those who just do their best and happen to get a high score. I firmly believe that students should have an equal chance at getting into the BLS no matter what score they gain. Why should we punish those who perform well? Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Tiffany Luo. Tiffany, please unmute yourself and thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Tiffany Law and I'm a junior at Boston Latin School. I'm here today to express my opinion on why the SAM school admissions should change for more equity and inclusion. The student population of BLS is not consistent with the rest of the district's population when white students make up the majority of the school in a district having a Black and Brown student majority. It doesn't make sense when most of the students hail from Westie, which is known to be a predominantly white upper class or middle class neighborhood, when much more of the student population of BPS is scattered across the city. The amount of children from Westie is the same amount of students from 4 different neighborhoods combined, when there are 6 times more students in BPS from the same neighborhoods. It doesn't even make sense when BLS gets way more funding for each of the students, around $24,000, when other schools are barely scratching $10,000 for the entire school community, or when some schools, particularly those for the special needs students, are struggling to fight for a new school building for the safety of their own students. There is also concerns about the environment that makes it so that POC deter from exam schools. As many other POC students like me and my friends have experienced firsthand direct racism and microaggression from my white peers when I first entered BLS in 2016, and other experiences I've heard from alumni ranging from 20 years ago to recent graduates of BLS and BLA. This all needs to change before the cycle continues on and hurts more POC students. I personally believe that exam school shouldn't even exist, and the attention and focus that we give to them should be the same amount given to every school in Boston to ensure students all succeed. If we all had given half of the focus we give to BLS to any other high school, their students would be thriving much more. Graduation rates would rise, achievement gaps would get smaller. The school to prison pipeline in BPS would not be as extreme. We should really be doing better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Sherry Kelleher. Please unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please start.
Okay, still trying on the camera. Give me 1 second.
Yes.
Oh, the fun. All right. Sorry, can you see me now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you all. I appreciate your patience. Thank you all, esteemed task force members. I greatly appreciate all of your efforts and all your thoughtfulness. A number of disparate thoughts as I've listened to what you've had to say. Chicago's admission policy traditionally uses 3 equally weighted criteria: state test scores, grades, and wait for it, an admissions exam. Next year, they're not using MAPS. They're just using their admission exam and GPA. They also achieved the diversity you are artificially gunning for by creating 5 pools, not 9. The first pool awards 30% of the seats based solely on academics, and the rest are 4 socioeconomic tiers, not 9. Neither median income, grades, or IC ranges tied to the 8 pools have been shared when modeled with this year's 7th graders. Don't you want all the data to drive your decisions? I'd also like to point out that attrition at the 3 exam schools has held steady at 2% over the past years, if not decades, with BLS the lowest. And, oh, by the way, the 3 exam schools have the lowest per student funding model of all the high schools across the city of Boston. I'm fascinated that those who advocate most strongly against an exam are not themselves BPS educators. They get to put their thumbs on the scale to get the initial outcome they want, and then throw the consequences over the proverbial wall for the educators, the family, and the city ultimately to deal with. I'd also like to point out that looking at City of Boston's city by the numbers from 2018, 31% of the under 5 population is white, 25% Black, 30% Hispanic, and 8% Asian. By the time they reach 15 to 17, white students have dropped down to 18% because we don't have good options and we choose to go up elsewhere because BPS is not providing those options.
2 minutes are up.
I'd like to hear you guys reach consensus to represent the city of Boston, not specialized interests. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Tarun Lee, followed by Wei Min Zhao and Sharon Hinton.
Can you hear me now?
Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Do you remember the Hunger Game movie? In the opening, in District 12, Katniss, the poor little sister Prime, is so scared because she was chosen by a lottery system to enter into Hunger Game to fight the kids from other districts. Using the tier and the lottery to enter exam school are exact the same act of Hunger Game. The tiers are the 12 districts in the Hunger Game. I would like to believe this committee could do better than the Hunger Game committee. Equity is putting kids on the equal footing, not a communism, not a reducing hardworking kids' right to exam school by tier and lottery. Have we defined what does economic disadvantage means? Last summer, my son went to an online ICE prep class for 2 weeks. After that, he improved a lot. The cost is about $600. Boston low-income threshold for a family of 4 is $54,000. Let's find the funding to support low-income kids to attend exam prep classes to put them on equal footing. But for the family about low income line, for $600, I don't know where economic disadvantage come from. I would like to suggest using the long existing exam school entrance criteria, half GPA, half test, to rank all the students to get the top either 60 or 70% student, and using the remaining 30 or 40% set aside for diversity. If you run the simulation, it will meet your objective to put more African and Latin American kids into exam school. Bottom line, do you want your own smart, hardworking kids' life depend on tier on the lottery?
Seconds left.
Or another way around? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Next speaker is Wei Min Zhao. Wei Min Zhao. Please unmute yourself and turn on your camera. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, please turn on your camera. Hello? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm trying to turn the camera on, sorry. Where setting?
Hello, Mrs. Zhao, are you there? Okay, so maybe we should continue to the next. Are you there?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, can you let the next speaker speak to
Okay.
first?
Sharon
Yeah.
Hinton. I don't see her name, so I will go to the next one. Sean Ryan. I don't see a Sean Ryan either, actually. Steve Yang. Steve Yang. Please turn on your camera and unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. If the exam school admission policy aims to decrease the seats for the Asian and to increase the seats for the Black and the Latinos, is this policy racism? By the way, do you also think this kind of policy is a way of Asian hate? To be honest with you, I have been scared to shut up as I heard this term of racism again and again. I don't want to use this term to intimidate anybody and to shut up the communication. Instead, I would like to discuss this issue frankly. In general, I appreciate the hard working by task force. However, there are still lots of space for some of task force members to improve regarding professionalism. Whenever you come up with a creative proposal, please think about it over and over again. Have you ever thought about what, for example, the growth factor was proposed as the only assessment? Have you ever thought about what would happen if they were adopted as an admission policy? For those students who have received almost the perfect score all the time, what growth factor would you like to expect? To be benefited from this policy, they would be forced to get a 0 score in the beginning and try the best.
20 seconds left.
Get the best score in the end. The policy, in fact, teach students to become a liar and a cheater. I don't think this is any education system looking for. I have to remind every task member that both taxpayers pay for your work I urge you
And
to
your 2 minutes are up.
the city of Boston instead of certain zip code.
Next, thank you very much. Next speaker is Eric Shi. Eric Shi. Please unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please turn on your camera.
Can you see me? Okay, yeah. It's already 8 o'clock and I really deeply appreciate your hard work and great effort. But I totally disagree with you about the idea around lottery. If we have to do it, one person I can accept, okay, for the lottery. And just a quick disclaimer, I'm a parent of an AWC student who failed in getting into any of those exam schools, but we are going to move out from Boston to another town. So I'm here tonight only just for the future of BPS, for justice, equity, and fairness, not for any of my personal interests, okay? So I just want to share one story with you. My son is good at academic, but also is even better at sports, especially basketball. He plays so hard, right? One of his dreams is to become an NBA player. But I told him, it's going to be very hard for you to become an NBA player unless there is a quota, lottery-based mechanism or selection mechanism, right? And but the question for some of you is, are you going to watch NBA games anymore if there's such a lottery-based selection mechanism in place? Period. I'm going to buy a lottery right now to see if I'm lucky or not. Bye.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Nora McManus Vincent. Please turn on your camera and unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening, task force members. My name is Nora McManus Vincent. I live in West Roxbury, and I'm the parent of 2 BPS students who will be entering the 4th and 1st grades at the Bates in the fall. I submitted written testimony a couple weeks ago in which I wrote about how very soon my older daughter and her classmates will be put into the Boston High School sorting machine. Thinking about our system as a sorting machine makes me think about the new math, guess my rule or number machine activity. It's the one that's designed to teach algebraic thinking to the smallest kids, and they've got an empty rectangle on the page labeled number machine, and they're given the inputs and outputs, and they have to find the rule. So 1 goes into the machine, 3 comes out, 2 goes into the machine, 4 comes out, and the kids have to figure out what happened inside the machine. In the case of selective admissions high schools in Boston, we know who goes in and we know where they come out, but we're only just beginning now to talk about the rule, even though the input and output have been very consistent for some time now. My husband and I are trying imperfectly to teach our kids to look around themselves and notice what patterns they see, and then to wonder about what forces are at work that have created those patterns. It's kind of like extending this number machine thinking beyond math. They can look around spaces that they are in now and notice who is there and who is missing. And then they ask us why. We don't always know the answers, but we do our best and we look together for answers when we don't know the history. When my 2 wealthy-ish white kids from West Roxbury are looking around at themselves and their classmates as they are sorted into high schools soon, I wonder what questions they will ask and how we'll be able to answer them about the trends that they see about which kids from which neighborhoods get to go to the schools with boathouses and banquets and which kids don't even know they exist. My sincere hope is that when they see the patterns, and they will, because all kids do, whether they verbalize it or not, we'll be able to tell them about the work of this task force to end the use of standardized tests that evolved from eugenics and all of the work that was done here to make the Boston High School machine a little bit more just. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will try with Wei Min Zhao again. Let's see if it works. Please unmute yourself and turn on your camera. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Weiming Zhao. I'm the resident of Boston. Maybe I should say resident of the zip code 02122, but you know, because Boston doesn't seem like one city anymore. I'm really confused. I'm very confused because you know, I remember last year when the school committee decided to implement the temporary admission policy presented by the working group. Some of them asked me.
Mr. Zhao, we can't hear you very well. Can you talk closer to the microphone?
Yeah. Some of them, my friend asked me, Boston exam schools are really lottery schools. I told them, no, that's not true. Even though I do not support the temporary admission policy, I do not want people to, you know, misunderstand that. Now I'm really confused because, you know, when I see some of the task force members are really trying to make the exam schools a lottery schools. So I just want to ask, did you earn your PhD through being lucky? So if you have done the research, right, you believe a test is bad, and you know, then can you show us your research? Why lottery is better than test?
20 seconds left.
So why a random number generated by the computer is the best way to determine what resource a student deserves? It's the best way to select the best student for exam schools. I just want to ask the question. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have 2 Cantonese speakers. I will turn off the interpretation icon, and interpreters will be in the main room. Interpreters, please stop interpreting and mute yourself for this part of the testimony. Next speaker, so I would need Terry for Cantonese. Next speaker is Shirley Chen Wang.
Shirley Chen Wang 你喺咪度啊？你可以打開啦，打開你個咪啦，同埋打開你嘅視頻喎。
睇到嘛？
睇到。
係我哋而家可以講係咪？我講一句，你幫我翻譯。
你講一兩句，你又停低，我同你翻譯。
OK， 拉丁，我係Boston 嘅居民。
I'm a Boston resident。
拉丁學校咧係需要將 Boston 所有嘅尖端聰明嘅優秀學生選拔出嚟入去學校就讀嘅。
The idea of Boston Latin is to select the smartest students to get in。
唔係以種族為低收入為一個理由或者藉口。
Instead of selecting based on race or their income level。
所以咧，我哋要將呢個拉丁學校嘅質量保持喺最高水平。
We want to keep the BLS the highest quality of the education。
所以考試同埋其他方面嘅審核，嚴格嘅審核係最好嘅。
So a rigorous exam and academic qualification is very necessary。
我希望咧唔會有其他因為因素而影響咗呢3間學校嘅質素。
I don't want to have other reasons or indications that will impact the quality of these 3 exam schools。
我非常之傷心同埋難過，因為上一年因為疫情嘅關係，02111嘅區號咧，本嚟一向都有20幾個學生進入去，但係舊年拉丁學校淨係只有7個名額。
I'm very saddened and I'm also very concerned based on the last year's selection criteria. Zip code 02111 only have usually have 20 students that will get into the exam school, but last year it was only 7 getting into the exam schools.
所以我希望呢啲優秀嘅學生唔好俾人忽略咗或者淘汰咗。
So I hope those students who are doing their best should be able to be selected to get into exam school instead of being forgotten.
有一些家長咧，唔好以為入到拉丁學校就可以成功。如果佢哋冇咁嘅實力，反而害咗佢，因為拉丁學校讀書真係好大壓力㗎。
So for students who are getting to the exam school, if they're not prepared well or if not capable enough to deal with the rigorous courses, they're going to have a tremendous amount of pressures on them.
甚至徹底毀滅咗一個細路仔嘅自尊心，同埋有自殺行為傾向嘅。
Sometimes it will make the kids ruin the kids' self-esteem. Some of the kids will run into depression or even suicidal thoughts.
所以有競爭先有進步，呢個係良性競爭，係對孩子教育嘅最好嘅理念。
And to create a positive competition environment is going to help the kids to succeed and do better.
所以咧，考試同埋平時嘅成績50-50係最公平公正最好嘅方法。
So I support assessment, a 50% weight in the assessment and 50% in the GPA to decide to get into the exam schools. It will be the most fair option.
20 seconds left.
美國想保持美國第一、人才第一、科技第一，所以咧唔好抽籤，唔好按家庭收入，係按實力去入呢間學校嘅。
We're the most advanced country in the world. So I do not support lottery. I do not support the income level. They need to get into the school with their own capability.
因為咧
You have
時間夠
2 minutes.
時間到啦。
好嘅，所以我希望最後一句就係唔 qualify 嗰啲學生可以留返學校。
Thank you.
Okay. So the last sentence is for those students who are not qualified, they shouldn't be getting into the same schools.
Thank you. Next speaker is Jody Chen.
Jody Chen, 係咪度啊？
Hello， 各位聽到嗎？
聽到。
OK。今日真係一個好長嘅會，成3個鐘啦。
This is such a long meeting. It's been 3 hours.
但係咧，我仲係有少少嘢想發表下，想大家可以聽一聽，用2分鐘時間聽一聽我嘅意見。
I still wanted to express my my feeling.
我想問在座各位成員一個問題，好似你哋而家在座坐喺呢度討論呢個咁重要嘅問題嘅時候，係因為你哋有足夠嘅專業能力啊，定係因為你哋嘅運氣好，先係可以坐喺呢度咧？
I want to ask a question to the task force members. The reason you are able to sit here to decide this very important, making this very important decisions, is it because of your professionalism or is it because of your luck?
我係相信你哋係有呢個能力嘅。
I believe it's because of the professionalism that you have.
而唔係因為你哋有呢個運氣可以坐喺呢度。
Instead of pure luck.
其實我咧都好希望可以成為你哋其中嘅一員，可以幫我個小朋友做一個正確嘅決定。
I also hope I could be one of the task force members, so I can help my kids to make the right decisions.
但係咧，我好似我咁樣嘅人咧，發言都仲需要翻譯嘅幫忙。
But for someone like me that needs an interpreter to help me to translate.
我覺得咧，我係冇呢個資格嘅。 我相信你哋都認為我係冇呢個資格嘅，係咪？
I believe I will not be able to qualify for that. I believe you also think that I will not be able to qualify.
所以咧，我覺得你哋做呢件事咧，係應該係一個能者居之嘅事情嚟㗎。
So to be able to do this type of job, being as a task force member, you need to have the qualification to be able to do that.
同樣呢3間 exam school 咧都係一樣。
Same idea goes to the 3 exam schools.
其實如果係呢間3間學校，因為制度嘅改變，入學制度嘅改變，令一啲好似我咁樣唔合資格嘅學生入咗去讀書，咁你哋認為咁樣會唔會係有問題咧？
So by changing the entrance policy for the 3 exam schools, allowing students like me to get into exam school who are not qualifying, do you see a problem here?
我一直都認為呢3間學校嘅核心價值就係為咗選拔一啲精英嘅學生。
I always believe that the core mission of the exam school is to select the most advanced students to get into them.
就好似在座各位咁樣優秀嘅人，
Just like the task force members.
而唔好似我咁樣嘅人。
Instead of someone like me.
因為好似我哋咁樣，我哋未有資格，就唔應該喺你哋呢啲優秀嘅人入邊嘅。
Because of I'm not qualified, so I shouldn't be selected to be one of your task force members.
咁選擇精英最古老、最有效嘅方法咧，就係公平公開嘅考試。
The best way to select the most qualified students is to use exam or assessment, which is the most equitable way.
Your 2 minutes are up. Thank you very much.
Last sentence. 就算係要改變，都一定要俾有能力嘅人入去讀，唔係靠運氣。
We want to select the students who have the ability to get into the exam school, not based on luck. A lot of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now activate the interpretation settings, and all interpreters will be in your channels again, and you can start interpreting. Ms. Sullivan and Mr. Contampassis, that concludes our speakers for tonight.
Great, thank you. I believe we're ready for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
That was Ms. Grassa. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Contampassis. Ms. Parvex.
Thank you. Ms. Aguirre,
Yes.
Mr. Chernow,
Yes.
Ms. Grassa,
Yes.
Ms. Lam,
Yeah.
Ms. Nagasawa,
Yes.
Ms. Garrett,
Yes.
Dr. Tang,
Yes.
Ms. Wade,
Yes.
Ms. Sullivan,
Yes.
and Mr. Contampassis.
He's on mute.
He's on here. Yes.
He's saying yes.
Yes. Thank you. That's unanimous.
Great.
Thank you all.
And thank you, everyone. Thank you to our interpreters tonight. We greatly appreciate
Good
your
luck Wednesday.
And indeed, you know what I missed, actually, I do want to say this, is giving a hearty congratulations to Mr. Chernow on his graduation, and to Ms. Nagasawa for her upcoming. We are so very proud of you, and it's just a pleasure to serve with you both. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.